Hello, Matt.
Hello, Josette.
I don't know why I said that so weirdly. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. We had a good one with John Pollono. I don't know, man. That we went deeper on this one than we have in a lot of things.
Well, I think
it's
because John is a pretty deep creator. Like, I think it's kind of cool in a way. Like that's what he was. That's how he makes and shares in the world with his work. Anyone who's familiar with John's movies, it's amazing because then that's the conversation you get to have with the creator, which is what's so cool about this podcast. Because I'm like, yes, we get to discuss process and how we got there. And yeah, he's really just such a badass, honest to gosh.
Oh, it's so badass. I can't even imagine carrying a feature film that you wrote that you're also directing. That's just a feat for a superhuman.
And acting, standing opposite really like beasts. I mean, you're standing opposite like John Bernthal, and you're giving it back with as much talent and craft and gusto. It's just, he's profoundly brilliant. And what a blessing that we got to talk to him. Oh my God, so cool.
It was a great conversation. We went deep, kind of covered the gamut.
Yeah, we did.
And if you hold on long enough, you'll hear about a play that we did together in 2006. I think that's when it was, so long ago. I don't know, his daughter was just born and now she's 17, so
yeah,
that was a while ago.
That was a while ago. That was a while ago. So yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that it just reminds me of why the hell we're doing this, because this is all I'm interested in, is these deep, delicious conversations about process and journeys and becoming, and this is really a powerful one. So I'm excited for you guys to hear this.
Absolutely.
He did tell us that his small engine repair movie, his beautiful independent film based on his play, is now available on Hulu. Am I right in saying that? Which is really cool. So if you haven't seen it, definitely get it there. And I'm sure, if you don't have Hulu, just buy the damn thing. Like, support independent film, because it's really an important piece of work, and well worth seeing.
Oh yeah, buy it on iTunes. Give them a little bit of, a lot of love. I think no one's buying movies nowadays, so that would be a big deal.
Yeah, buy a movie. Rewatch the damn thing. And Stronger is actually, I think I just watched it the other night. I rewatched it again. I think that's available on Amazon right now, on Amazon Prime.
Perfect.
So yeah, you can get that one for free too. And he's got some exciting movies in the works that he talks about too. So
it's exciting.
This is going to be a good one.
All right, folks, please enjoy this beautiful conversation with John Pollono.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, how you doing, man?
Good.
Good.
I didn't get dressed up because you said it was just audio, so apologies.
Exactly.
Dude, I'm literally in my tracksuit in my closet. So nice to meet you from this very humble disposition.
I know, you look like you're being held hostage. What's going on there?
I'm going to hold my hands like this for the rest of the recording.
She's here in my studio, but just
I see.
Just in his closet.
Yeah.
That would be so bizarre, Matt, if that was true.
I know.
Also, I feel like that's a script waiting to come out of some of us.
I know.
Technology.
But John, are you in LA?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So you and Josette are in the same general vicinity.
Oh, nice.
So that's good.
Where do you live, Josette?
I'm in Silver Lake. Where are you?
I'm over Woodland Hills.
I see we can't be friends. I was so looking forward to meeting you so we could become friends, but you just ended that real quick.
Too far away for you? Is it beyond this year?
It's too far.
May as well be Boston.
I know, right?
LA is so strange.
Well, I've gotten very familiar with your background because you did a lot of stuff. There's a lot of you on YouTube doing little
of me
interviews and podcasts.
Oh yeah,
and stuff
we
like
did.
That.
You know, man, you do your first movie too. You just do a full court press, and it's like, most of the shit they have, like indie filmmakers do, end up being podcasts, like more long form, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. It's a great conversation, and I think, podcasts proliferated through COVID, and I only did a couple in person at like a fucking studio. Everything else is it.
Yeah.
But it's cool because it's longer conversation, and I listen to them if it's something I'm interested in. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's very I listen to Conan O'Brien's podcast a lot, and
his is great.
It's awesome, but he says it all the time where he's like, he never imagined that this would be such a good thing, so much fun doing a podcast because he always wanted to be a late night show, but he knew a bazillion celebrities for 6 minutes and that's it. He never got a chance to really dig in, and now he gets to dig in, which is super cool.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, his are so silly that sometimes I'm like, ask some real questions, which he kind of barely does, but usually he just does weird like runners and it's hilarious, but it's a different mood. I don't know. Whatever you're in the
funny.
mood.
He's always doing his bits. Like he can't relax. He has to do bits. He's
always on.
Yeah, always on. It's impressive though how he does that.
Yeah, I mean he's like the best there is at that. I mean, he's
for sure. It's crazy.
Matt was kind of preparing to do a little of that for this, but I think now you're going to have to back down, Matt.
Oh, that's fine if he wants to.
I wanted to, but yeah, it's not.
We're going to have to ask real questions, okay?
Right.
Fair enough. So I don't have to worry about my posture. I can just lean back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can. You can get real comfy.
I got my dog in here. She may start getting rowdy, so if she does, there's her butt. But.
Hey.
Oh, cute.
I had my dog. I took him home. He was barking through the last episode, so I was like, I'll just take him home for this, and that way he's super jumpy about anything. He just barks. He doesn't do anything, but it's very loud.
And you live in Colorado?
I do, yeah.
What part?
I'm living it's a town called Fort Morgan. It's way northeast, about an hour from Denver, kind of out in the plains area. It's where I grew up. And,
is that right?
Yeah. So kind of made a home here, and it's great, man. It's great. I absolutely love it.
I lived in Durango for about 2 years.
Really? No way.
Yeah, right after I got out of college, I kind of ended up there.
Did you want to be were you ski bumming it, or what were you up to?
You know, man, I moved out with a girl who was going to school at Fort Lewis, and we lived in like a trailer park in the mountains, and it was awesome. But we were so poor. We were so poor. It was beyond that threshold of it was probably the most impoverished I'd ever been.
Wow.
I mean, like dangerous now in retrospect. In terms of like, oh shit, we don't have money. We're not going to eat for a couple of days.
Yeah.
21 years old and like, just dumb. Yeah. But, and then we figured out a way to make money in that town, which is like wait tables and stuff. But, the first it was tough. Anyway, some dark days, but I am forever loving Colorado. I love it. It's my favorite state. And, I brought my family to Durango not last summer, the summer before. I rented an RV and we drove out, nice. I love it, man. I'd love to get a place there someday. Yeah. All of it, cool. But obviously, where you're from is much different topographically than Durango, but it's all great. Yeah,
but it's all so. That's the thing about Colorado is it's all so different. It's not even the same state. It feels like sometimes, between where I live, Durango is not the same type of town as Aspen or Vail. It's all just kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
but Denver's a great town. I love Denver. It's fantastic, but yeah, it's pretty amazing spot. Josette's even been here. We shot.
Oh my God, I have.
I was gonna say, Josette, have you ever been out there?
I have. It's weird how much I fell in love with Fort Morgan. Matt thought I was totally insane, but I was like, I really love this place. Like I kind of even made friends with a guy at the Walmart that I just became obsessed with. I was just like, these people are so dear. Like I've never met such kind, lovely, welcoming human beings. I was like, I could have stayed.
Yeah.
And where are you from, Josette?
I'm from South Africa originally.
Nice.
But I've been in LA for like 9 years now. So yeah, but I have that healthy African heritage. Runs deep.
Do you go back there?
Well, not recently because of this pandemic, of course. But I used to go back kind of every 2 years or so. But yeah, I mean, it definitely is a completely different world. Like it's coming from Africa and seeing third world and like life in a different way. Like it definitely shapes a vision or a perspective. Oh,
I can imagine. I had a friend whose wife was from South Africa. I remember that.
Oh wow.
She was Jewish family and they had like settled here, but they were from there. She lived there when she was very young, but I just thought it was cool because that seems so different than my experience in life.
It's weird because I mean, obviously, like I've watched your work and I'm a huge fan, and I was just it's funny because I think you actually have an understanding of kind of what I've experienced. Just watching the way you approach your writing and stuff. There's a grit to your work, and there's a kind of there's a realism that I just, oh my God, I'm so obsessed with. I mean, it makes me so happy to see that kind of stuff. I feel, I mean, it feels like you get it. Like, you know what it's like to kind of be in the weeds, in the mud of life. Like, there's dirt under your nails and it's tangible in your work, which is so cool, so.
Well, thanks. That's so sweet of you. I think in particular, Small Engine Repair, which obviously was a thank you.
Just honest.
Either way, honesty is sweet, and there's not enough of it, unfortunately. Which is, that's what I'm always trying to do. By the way, did we start? Am I supposed to talk?
Like, I was just going to say we're.
Oh, okay, it was so chill. I'm like, is this it? Is there more of like, am I forgetting some preamble?
We have zero fanciness about us.
We started winging it, and we were just like, you know what? Let's just go into it, and then when we're done, we're done. It's like,
fair enough.
And then I'll edit it appropriately.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Welcome to my closet.
Welcome, jump in the closet. So it's interesting you say that because, and I've had a lot of soul searching with that, especially releasing, this movie in a culture that is really, to some extent, at the moment, averse to hard truths. You know what I mean? And to me, it was always like growing up in New England. You didn't talk about your feelings. You didn't do that. It's okay. I'm fine. And it's like you swallow down your trauma and your anger and all that stuff. So when I got into theater, especially when I started to write, I was like, Jesus, I'm not going to lie again, or not even lie. I'm like, I'm going to just be the truth. And I've never, look, I write a bunch of different stuff. Sometimes it's entertaining and sometimes like Small Engine Repair, which has entertaining qualities to it, but at the same time, it's in service of sort of holding a mirror up and looking at something, warts and all, and not having a simple solution. The play was designed and the movie was designed to be provocative and create a conversation and to see, the ugliness and the beauty and everything. And it was just like to be raw. That I love that kind of art. To me, that's the most sort of powerful art. Now, I do think sometimes utopic art is great, but I think we have too much of that. And I think people are just so conditioned to want to like see their own belief system regurgitated back at them. And like whatever I believe politically or as a person, that's not my art is not, in service of that. My art is like when I create something, it's to explore something, but to be honest. And sometimes that honesty is hard, but with Small Engine Repair, which I started in, it was a late night play that I had written for, what was it, like 4 years after I was in a play with this guy up on top.
We'll get there.
And it was, I was like, I'm not going to filter it. I'm going to be the most unfiltered, raw, the way guys talk. And even still, it's still a little filtered down, but I was like, I'm not going to make these guys nicer. I'm going to make them really flawed and fucked up. And the situations is flawed and fucked up. And it really, really connected with people. And it really shined a light on that concept of like the more specific you are. Oh, I think I lost you guys for a second. The more specific you are in your storytelling, the more universal it becomes. So people would see Small Engine Repair, the play, and the movie. I wish I could, the movie came out in a vacuum. Like I didn't really get to see it except with two small audiences because of the pandemic. But with the play, when I was in it, I did it in LA and New York, and it's been done all over the place, but you get to talk to people afterwards. And it would always is like people from Australia and South Africa and Italy and Chile, everywhere. They'd be like, oh, wow, that's like my dad and his friends. Or that's like me and my friends. Or like, I know those guys. Like in every town, by the way, the funny thing is like there was a tagline when I was a kid and I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, and they're like, in every town there's an Elm Street. Well, in every town there's a Small Engine Repair shop.
Hell yeah,
at least a couple of them. So it just created this thing where you're like, it's hyper specific in the references and the accents and all that stuff, but in its specificity, it actually created a more universal story that people are surprisingly were really relating to or getting.
It's so true. Oh my God. Everything you're saying is just, it's everything I believe to be true about the world and everything I want to do in my own work. Like it's what I aspire towards, to have this kind of, this vulnerability as well as the truth. It's just, it's such power. I mean, it's interesting because it's in Stronger too. Like obviously your adaptation of that, of the book. I'm so interested in your take on that, because the way you were able to create a hero with so much, with so many flaws and so many obstacles to overcome internally, it speaks to that same thing of this man who's not able to feel, who's not able to speak as, not able to be vulnerable, Is that just because you have that experience of life that you were able to give that to him, or
yeah, I mean, so interesting. Stronger came about in a point in my career where I had written plays. I was a playwright at the time and not really making money elsewhere. And my plays were starting to get me meetings and stuff like that. And my plays were always to that, complicated, flawed characters. I mean, in theater, maybe not now, it's changed a little bit, but when I started out in theater, it was always like a place where you tell a story that rocks the boat, that makes questions the audience as much as the culture. So whatever these things were, I was always like, all right, let me bring that brand of it. I just grew up in New England. I knew the language. And quite frankly, I was just always so interested in class and never having seen it really accurately done enough. Not really in theater either. We talk about so many other things. There's so many sort of trendier, things going on right now, but we're still unable to talk about class to the same extent. And unfortunately, the sort of gatekeepers in a lot of these industries come from wealth, and so they don't get it. So I was always really trying to explore that in my plays. And then this book came across, and I grew up 20 minutes from where Chelmsford, where Jeff Bowman is from.
Good God.
And the book, it's not a good book. It's like an airport book. It was like a quick book. I mean, they did a really good job with it, but the explosion happened in April. And by that, I think holiday, it was in airports.
Oh,
wow. And Jeff didn't write the book, just for those listening. Jeff wasn't the guy who wrote the book.
Jeff wrote it, but he had like a not a ghostwriter, but he had a writer write with him. And that writer was really cool, and they gave me a lot of access. And I think they did an incredible job given what they were undertaking. But then I met him shortly after the book was published. So I met him like a year after he lost his legs. And when I was around him, I realized not that the book is bullshit, but the book was like I had said in New England, it's like, let's only talk about what we're supposed to talk about. And it created this sort of heroic version of it. Yeah. And I realized spending time with him and his family, I'm like, this guy has PTSD. And his wife was pregnant at the time. They're now divorced. But I got to know her, and I really was like, wow, this is a two-hander. She's, and I always, look, it sounds so stupid, but like, I love writing women. I've never even thought about it. It just happens. But and sometimes it's like a thing, like, oh, he's a guy, he knows how to write women. I'm like, there's like, to me, it's such a ludicrous thing. But I guess having I have 3 sisters, and growing up around women is always like, I don't know, silly thing to say. But anyway, I was just like, wow, Aaron is a compelling character, yin and yang. And then it was really like the whole city and the book tried to make him a hero, and he was a fucking mess. Still was. And I was like, that's what I want to make the movie about. So I did. And it was really about sort of pulling the curtain back on this thing and saying like, look, here's a guy who people are in pain, the city's in pain, the country's in pain, and they're looking to him to heal them. But he's a real person, and he's you know what I mean? And that's sort of his journey. Like, that's bullshit. And how we create these heroes. People come back from war and they're busted to pieces, and you're like, oh, you're a hero. And that person's like, I'm a fucking mess. Yeah. And when you put that pressure on me, in many ways, it makes it even worse. So that was the sort of core of it. And, it's an interesting time in our country, especially where we were a lot more didactic about terrorism and stuff. Now it's like, what do you say? This and that. And, I think in one of my early outlines, I had more of the terrorists in there. And one of the producers, Scott Silver, who I've gone on to write a bunch of stuff with, he was like, look, man, he's like, don't have them at all. He's like, stick to his point of view. Yeah. And he's like, you can write those scenes, but they're going to be cut. And he was right. So it was like really to not judge any of that stuff, to just sort of talk about the aftermath of it. And that's what interests me. I'm like, I don't know if you could make that movie today, but I lucked out. I think I was one of the last to make like a big budget, sort of dark, challenging studio movie. And it was it's extraordinary what you were able to achieve, because it feels like so often I think we're scared to show this side of people. It's like you're saying, we're terrified of seeing the ugliness and the truth, and like that is who we are, and I think part of that is what informs the heroism is actually
the pain and the vulnerability, because it gets us to that point, right? And I think that's what's so beautiful about that journey of that character.
Well, and then, you probably the best compliment I got of that is we did a premiere back when they used to do premieres in Boston at the hospital that rehabbed Jeff. Oh, wow. And afterwards, this couple came up to me, and it was a guy who was, he was in a wheelchair, and he was a paraplegic, and his wife, and they had gotten married, and she goes, "This is the most realistic I've ever seen about the caregivers." She's like, people don't realize how hard it is. They always try to show that heroism, and she's like, "We had a lot of rough times, and we still do." And like, thank you for that. I was like, "Oh my God, I was so beautiful. happy that they did that." And like, man, spending time with these amputees and seeing it, it's like you'll learn how to take a shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to learn all this stuff, it just was like I felt a lot of pressure because I'm from there, and I'm like, I don't want to fuck up this New England thing. And then, you just put it out there. I mean, that's one thing I kind of learned about, what's great about making a movie is you put it out there, and it's on its own kind of journey. I mean, Stronger had a theatrical release, and they supported it, and then they kind of just, didn't quite know what to do with it, and it had some awards campaign, and then it kind of fizzled out. And and you're like, okay, but then here we are years later, and I still get hit up by people who see it or discover it. And it's been similar to Small Engine Repair too, because I released a movie in a fucking pandemic. I mean, it's like everything conceivably stacked against.
Good God. Yeah.
We hope you love listening to the Makers podcast as much as we love making it.
And if you would like to show your support and keep us going and keep us making magic and bringing these gorgeous creative conversations to you, perhaps you'd consider becoming a contributor to the Makers podcast. If you'd like to do so,
visit anchor.fm/themakers/support to get started. And now back to the show. I love what you said, that I think I really hate echo chambers. It's like my least favorite thing in the world. And I really hate that it has infiltrated art to the extent that people really only want to see art that supports their worldview. I think that's where theater was so strong, was like you said, we've got you locked in this room and we're going to make you think about yourself for the next 2 hours or whatever it is. And you kind of accepted it and enjoyed it. And now we don't even go to movie theaters that much anymore. Now it's just this litany of things we can scroll through and find what supports our worldview a little bit. And so I love that that's where you're at. It was just, I'm going to write it truthfully. It might offend your sensibilities to a certain extent, but these are the characters' journeys. That's the thing. You don't judge your own characters at all in your writing. And I love that. There's no judgment. These guys are raw. They're real. They're doing their thing. Even a real character, like in Stronger, there was no judgment being passed on this character. He was experiencing it real time for us to watch. And dude, it was intense. I mean, I watched it when it first came out, and I've never been like that. I mean, like the legs and stuff just was like, it moved me in a way that I had not really been moved by a movie of that type. So it was phenomenal. Absolutely amazing.
Thanks, man. It was weird. We had in the premiere we had in Boston, so we had to stop the screening. Someone had a sort of like a seizure because prompted by the intensity of the bandages being removed in that scene. And it had someone who had something similar or whatever. And you're like, oh shit. I mean, the intent, it's not like, look, I guess it's good if that happens and you made like some horror movie. If that happens on like Midsommar, you're like, cool. Yeah. And then when I went and I did like a Q&A the opening weekend, again, back when people went to the movies, and I invited a whole bunch of friends, and we went to like the ArcLight, and they had to pause it too because someone in the same scene had this reaction for something. And I think it's because the slow burn of getting to know him, so that what happens to him is so visceral to the audience because they've known him. It's so real, and it's not gratuitous or gory. It's just personal. And a lot of movies just don't have the bandwidth necessarily to do that. And, again, that was sort of a rare thing. It wasn't misery porn, but it was just like, hey, this is what happened to this guy. And sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't. I mean, I was like so fucking lucky with that with that script and everything, and I got such a great education about it. And I was able to work with people who really helped me harness my voice within that project.
Right.
I never written a studio movie before, And making a movie is so massively collaborative, as is theater, but in a different way with movies. It's, your script in a way initially is like a marketing tool to get a team together, to get them involved in it. And, whereas theater, look, I think a lot of my storytelling comes from theater and from those muscles and from being an actor and working with actors. And it's like actors, it's a kiss of death if you judge that character, like Ralph Fiennes played a monster in Schindler's List.
Yeah.
And he's, has sympathetic pieces in it, human pieces in it, tragedy, and he's a monster. And it makes it more horrific and human if you play a human being. And, that's what we want to do. You want to show up to work. If people get up and they're not like, oh, I'm Darth Vader, I'm the bad guy. They're like, no, everyone gets up thinking that they're doing the right thing.
Right.
Or they justify it and they're trying. And you're always at the core of that. But yeah, I mean, look, Small Engine Repair, when it came out in 2011 as in theater, as a late night play, it was massively embraced for all of the things that make it trickier today. And not trickier, I think, to audiences, but trickier in the sense of like, we're just so like waiting for people to fuck up and call them on.
Right.
And I mean, look, I remember from being very young, having a real bone to pick with the concept of like, I want to write about whatever I want to write about and have characters do things, but don't judge me as the writer. I don't write characters that have a mouthpiece. I mean, some great writers do that. I mean, Aaron Sorkin, you know what he believes politically and he finds a way to do it. But, even him, like Aaron Sorkin can write an incredibly well-rounded conservative.
Yeah.
He can do all this stuff, but his movies tend to be very clearly political. It's like, I did that once with a play that was more had a very clear sort of thing it was saying. So to me, Small Engine Repair has a very progressive statement in terms of the film's not about stasis. It's not saying, hey, this is how it is. It's more like examining this thing and as an audience talking about it. Now, in theater, you're able to try all these complicated things and people are there for it and they'll talk about it. Again, I don't know Small Engine Repair. I didn't get to really see the movie but to me, it was very much, a feminist piece, just like the play was. And it's primarily men, but what is it saying about women? And more importantly, to me, it was like the images that I always see in movies in terms of sexual violence against women, and a whole litany of that, sometimes played horrifically, sometimes played so like the tough guy will get his revenge, and then sometimes even played slightly for laughs in a creepy way. That I was like, I wanted to just turn those tables slightly to men. And that emerges as the controversial element of the movie. Kind of shocks me that I'm like, don't you get this double standard? Like if you lay it bare and say it, that some people just don't. Again, I don't know. Let me just preface this by saying I don't read reviews. I'm like, I learned that early on as a playwright to like avoid that. I mean, every now and then my wife would like send me a review of the movie or a play, and it's been sort of vetted. Yeah. So then you're like, yeah, I'll read those. But then like 3 days go by and you don't get one. You're like, what does that mean? They're all shitty. So it's like,
right.
You're damned if you do. So you're damned if you don't.
But really, the best way to get to know, I mean, you make this shit to engage with an audience and to have that feedback loop. And so, which again, in theater, you're able to have that.
That's interesting. I mean, do you feel like with your work you are specifically making to have conversations? I mean, is that an intention of yours, or?
I mean, I think. Look, I think what movie? If you love a movie, you want to talk about it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And you don't just the conversation's not solely like, oh, it was so good. Now, look, I can talk about John Wick in terms of the technicality and the muscular script and the this and that, and it's fun as hell. But I don't necessarily think John Wick has a theme that it's really exploring. I love it. It's great, but it doesn't necessarily. And then you see a movie where you're like, wow, that's really saying something. It's what is it? Like see Nomadland, which is very sort of
God.
mysterious and
Beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful and clearly has something going on. And you could talk about that a lot. You could talk about a movie like Deliverance, people still talk about that. So it was like, when you make a low budget movie that hinges on storytelling and acting, you got to play, swing big and make something that makes a splash. And I was like, the only thing I could see that translated from the play was to really, pull a 180 on an audience and make them, the lights come up and go out and get that beer afterwards or a cup of coffee and be like, fuck, we got to talk about this and have different points of view. You know what I mean? And by the way, like I made that movie. Like if you watch it again, you'll probably have a deeper understanding as to the breadcrumbs that are laid out for that, or maybe not. So that was, to me, that was like the art, like that to create that kind of stuff, that dynamic, that journey for an audience.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes you just make stuff that's entertaining, but I always try to make it smart.
Did you feel like you were? I mean, when you wrote the play, because I actually had the blessing of watching the play in LA. I mean, it wasn't.
Really?
Yeah, and I didn't even know that at the time. I didn't know that Matt was your friend or you guys had worked together. I just actually ended up in a theater in LA watching the play. Did you always think that was a movie, or was that specifically a play first?
No, it was definitely specifically a play.
Okay.
Now John Bernthal and I, who's obviously in the movie, and he was in. Did you see Bernthal in the cast?
Oh my God! No, I didn't. I wish. My God, I'm such a huge fan of his. No, I
because he did the play for I think 2.5 months, and then he went and did Walking Dead, and we had an understudy who was excellent. But John and I were always like, oh, yeah, this would be a good movie. And then look, for an independent movie, it's ideal if you have primarily one location. It just makes it easier.
Yeah.
So I had that built in, but then I was like, we touch and go, and then. I mean, honestly, when the Me Too movement happened, I was like, okay, I see it. Because it was like a pre-Me Too play. Mm-hmm. And sadly, I had to update the technology in the movie, but the dilemma of social media causing catastrophe and moral quandaries only amplified in the 10 years since the play was written.
Yeah, of course.
And the Me Too made that conversation a lot more relevant, a lot more like people are having these conversations. The appetite is whetted. So we were like, oh, this is a good time to revisit this and do it, knowing we have material that is like battle tested. And I'm like, I know certain lines, characters, the characters are very lived in, they all worked. And, to do it as a movie, again, it's who the fuck knew that I'd be hit with a pandemic and any number of things. This was I always envisioned this as a movie to have a festival life. Yeah. And it was supposed to premiere at South by Southwest, which was like the slam dunk, place for this. And then festivals all got canceled that year.
Man.
Yeah.
So, you can't control that. So
did you do an online South by Southwest though? I mean, was that all
when we were in I finished color timing the final movie the morning South by was canceled. So South by offered a partnership with Amazon where they were going to stream it, but it was so new that the language, like when you want to sell it to a distributor, that you can't have at that time. It's changed now. But back then it was so fresh. Yeah. They're like, you can't sell it to a place and say, oh, it's already streamed. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That was their concern, so we didn't do it. I mean, whatever. And then now it's like they're more the festivals are streaming more, but they just weren't then. And then that was sort of like, hey, let's put it on ice. I mean, we didn't know. We're like, all right, let's just put it on ice, and then we'll resubmit it to the new stuff. And then the pandemic, because didn't we all think it was going to last like 3 months?
So I literally thought it was 3 months. I was like, cool, we'll be back up by June. Like, what is everyone complaining about? And I was like,
yeah, that's what it is. We're like, look, we'll just hold it this summer.
Now suddenly I'm like, where did 2021 go? Like, what the fuck's happening? Mm-hmm. It's so
I know.
nuts.
So that was the thing, No, it was impossible to.
It's devastating because I really feel like it's a piece that audiences do need to see. It's so timeless. It's got such a. I think I hear you saying it's a feminist piece and stuff, but I think it's also this. I think the subject of toxic masculinity and speaking about like what it is to be a man in society today is just so important because I just think that, living in a patriarchy, it's like I just don't think that anyone's actually benefiting from this. Like, as much as it fucks with women, it really fucks with men. Like, you know, it's not set up for any of us to succeed, except for the few high-class, high-level power people who are sending like penis rockets into space, of course. But, you know, for the rest of us, like, it's a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think to your point, the fact that it resonates on those levels makes me really happy to hear you say.
Yeah.
I didn't set out to make a movie about quote unquote toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Only because, like, to me, that word, like, if you make a flawed woman, is it toxic femininity? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
What I wanted to do is set out and create a very specific story where these sort of gender dynamics happen, and where these guys are circling the drain in terms of the cyclicality of violence and all that stuff that they came up with. And like, again, to our point earlier, is I think if you zoom in and you're really truthful about something, people are going to find the truth in it. And it's going to resonate with whatever's going on in their life. Like, I hear what you're saying, 100% that's in there. And you're like bouncing off of that, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Someone may see that and be like, I already knew all that shit. I'm offended because you're using language that we've moved on from. And I'm like, that's totally fine. Be offended. But you have to be like, this is truthful. This is how people are still talking. This is how most of the country is struggling or working poor.
Yeah.
And this is what it is. And I'm not going to lie about that if you find it offensive or whatever. But I know if I boil it down and I'm truthful about it, that people will find these chemical reactions from it. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what's cool about hearing you say that. So meaning, for example, if I sit down there and I'm like, I'm going to write a play about toxic masculinity, it's going to be kind of didactic.
Well, of course.
You see what I mean?
Yeah,
so
of course.
To me, that's really cool to zoom in on something.
Yeah.
And just be really raw and truthful.
I mean, I'm pulling out a theme and I'm globalizing it, of course, which maybe is unfair to do to the art, because you're right. It's so layered and so complex, and it is so real that I'm actually denying the layers by saying that. So
no, and I listen. By the way, I will say this is like a lot of stuff I make. I made this play for the smartest woman in the room. I made this for my sisters. I made this for my wife. I picture them in my head. My daughter was very young at the time, but I'm like, I grew up around women, and you know, I was like, let me dramatize a lot of the trauma I've heard them having, but do it through a lens that I'm deeply, profoundly, catastrophically familiar with. Do you know what I'm saying? To explore that and to find that truth and then to sort of unlock it. So look, it's weird, man. I don't know what the term toxic masculinity is so controversial to some people, men and women, like because conservative people.
It pushes at their ego structure. Come on. I mean, it shakes the ground they're standing on, you know? I think that's the problem.
You know, that I think if you deconstruct that word a little bit, it's interesting as to where we are, because you and I can have this great conversation about it. Both sides of the political spectrum get triggered so fucking easily.
Yeah, they do.
And they look for words on both sides to shut the conversation down, which is antithetical to us doing anything. Do you know what I mean? Of course. And it's very frustrating and it's very crazy. But like the fact is that, you know, I don't know how to skate by without offending some people. I mean, like, I can tell you some really interesting stories offline that you'd be like, what? You know, because like, yeah, man, you just never know what people are going to flip out over.
You know, it's funny though, because the level of, I mean, maybe it's just because how I tend to watch movies and because I know you and I was so excited to see the film. I was totally in a, what would I do in their situation zone that entire movie, and I was finding a piece of myself in every character. You know, I can find myself being Johnny Goodtime and, like, you know, Shea Wiggum's character, who's just like, he's there for the fun and but is sort of like low status, or John Bernthal's, like, where it's like he kind of feels like, you know, he took care of your character's daughter for a time, and he's so kind of a caretaker, and then your character with this sort of, like, you know, this redemptive quality that was happening through 3/4 of the movie until the twist kind of happens, and you're like, holy fuck, what would I do in that situation? Right. So you were always upping the game on and the stakes on what would I do in that situation? Because I have friends who I'm as close to as those three guys, and if one of them had me in that situation, what would I do? And then even the frat boy, you know, I was even in his situation. It's just like, you know, what if you're at a party and this goes down and you're not responsible per se, but you are. It's just you did such an amazing job of making me see all of them as humans, and putting myself into their shoes, which I think is, you know, I mean, that's why I watch movies, really.
Well, man, I love that. Look, the movie, the play and the movie were definitely the design to sort of subvert the tropes of like the masculine revenge movies, like the Takens and all that stuff, which are fun, but like that's not how real life works, and you know, it's just not deep. And by the way, it's like it's insulting to women as to be used as a pawn. So it was really about creating that and going a bit further with it and be enticing with it. And yeah, I mean, look, I think if you create layered real characters, people will find different facets of themselves into it. But again, look, I just got such a kick out of seeing people always, when we did this play and the movie, like women love it in my experience, and they love it because they're like, I get what you're saying. And guys may be like, oh, it's fucking awesome, it's like me and my friends, but they may not dial into the fact is like, you know, the concepts of power and the victimization and the look. I think it's pedantic to say Small Engine Repair's thesis is like I was a misogynist until I had a daughter. That's not it. That's really saying, you know, it's personalizing. Look, man, how many times as a guy do you grow up? And maybe it's different now, but you're like drinking and you're with strangers and you're at like some party in, you know, in New Hampshire or whatever, or Colorado. And some guy comes up and tells you this story drunkenly, and you're in your head, you're like, that's sexual assault. Like, that's not right. And look, you're 18, you don't have the, and especially in the environment that I grew up in, that this movie takes place, is you're not in an environment where you have the language to be like that. You just feel it. Something's wrong. You know what I mean? So it's addressing that as much as this sort of like casual, like type of misogyny. I mean, I really wanted to kind of break those three characters down into like very specific commentaries on misogyny or masculinity. And it's like, you know, you have Packy, who's like sort of distant, and you know, Shay did this beautiful thing in the movie where he made Packy's sexuality very ambiguous and very like, you know, is he bisexual or is he confused? Like, he definitely is not comfortable with it. And you know, Sueno is like full of shit. He's that guy who's like, he's only has intimacy when he's fucking somebody, or most of the time he isn't, and he just brags about it. And Frank's only way to feel intimate is to be sort of the knight in shining armor and violence. And it's like he doesn't know how to be delicate with his daughter. He only knows how to avenge her. And those were all tropes, and those were all like facets of us as guys, like regular guys, to explore and then really bring them to a place where there's no catharsis from that, you know. And I don't know, I was always that guy who would be at a party and I'd have, you know, by having sisters and just having that quality, is like, I'd have women tell me things when I was young, and especially like in my late teens, early 20s, and tell me these things that there was like a world happening that I'm like, most guys aren't aware of or choose not to. So that just always stuck with me, to have and not that the women can't tell it their own story, but to be like, how do I address that with my point of view, which to me is like what art should do. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And to Josette's point is like, that's why I get so frustrated when people are like, this is what your story should be about, and this is who should tell it, and this is the language you should use, and this is the point of view you should use, and it's like so antithetical to this.
And also, we can't, I think as creators and writers and directors and such, we can't know what stories we're meant to tell until they come to us. I just believe it comes to us from an otherworldly place, you know, and that is, you know, and what you get given, you get given. I don't know what's going to arrive next week that I have to now feel compelled to create. I'm interested also in this. idea of you, from where you're from and your journey to becoming a man. Like, how do you feel like your I mean, I hate the word journey sometimes because it sounds so lame because everyone overuses it, but in some way, yes, your path to actual manhood. Like, what does that look like for you? And where are you in this, spectrum of masculinity?
I think I've had facets of all three of those guys personally. And I think I definitely grew up in it was easier for me to fit in by being good at sports and like being aggressive, and I was like, ball busting and doing all that shit. I was wanted to be a writer from very young, but my sort of creative self was closeted, basically. I didn't grow up in an environment like, it's interesting as I moved out and I moved to New York and LA, I just found such a kinship to so many of the gay people who I've become friends with and collaborated, because their stories, especially if they're from a more like, New England or Texas or whatever, they've had to, it's a journey. And again, I'm not equating it the same, but I was like, something about hiding your true self until you can't anymore. So I felt that was it. I mean, look, I grew up with a lot of anger issues. My dad has a short fuse and his dad was even worse. So I always had fluctuated between like when that red zone goes off. I mean, nothing like Frank, but very much feeling rewarded for that for a large period of my life. And then suddenly having to shift that. And it's not that having a daughter changed that, but like, I do remember we had our kid right before Matt and I did the play. And, I had a temper and my wife would be like, you can't be doing, I remember having my daughter in the car driving, and she was like 1 or something. Someone cut me off on a bike and I'm like fucking yelling at him. And it was just so instinctual. Like when they do that, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Whatever. And the guy like pulled his bike over and started to say shit. And I was like calm and being like, oh, he's opening the door. We can go, well, now we can do this. And if I lose my temper or whatever, it's fully within the dueling codes of whatever. And then I saw my daughter and she's like crying, and I got in and my wife was like, you just can't do that anymore. Like, you're a dad, so that was really sort of not healthy. That, especially in LA, it's different, honestly. Like, you go to Boston and you get into a fight and you can, you're probably not going to get, you're probably not going to get stabbed. You may get beat up,
use your teeth.
You're not going to get shot or anything. And LA is like a different, I learned that early on. It's a different like thing.
Yeah.
New York too. It's like you're going to get jumped by like 20 people and someone probably has a weapon. There just isn't, when you're out of your environment, the rules are different. I don't know what it's like in Colorado or South Africa, but like where I grew up, to a large extent, if you knew enough people in your neighborhood, that would make sure it wouldn't escalate to, curb stomping. And then when you're out of your element, you're like, oh shit, who knows? And usually the people who don't know how to fight are the ones who are going to carry some kind of weapon, or if you knock them out or hit them, then they're going to go to their car or whatever. So that was like, oh shit, you just don't want to mess with that.
Yeah, if you're looking for it too, I mean, that's always, I'm a big believer in that. If you're looking for it and if you're living by it, it's the whole live by the sword, die by the sort of concept. If you're out there looking for a fight, you're going to find one. And if that's what you're always in tune for. Absolutely.
But I mean, I think, I had a period in my life where I thought that's how I was in a way courting women, when I was younger, like avenging the misdeeds upon them, and then, so it's come a long way, but now I have a 17-year-old daughter now, and she teaches me shit every day. And God, I mean, how often I'm like, I sound like just my fucking parents, you know what I mean? Like all the time.
She's 17? Is it been that long since we did that play?
She just turned 17, but yes.
Get out of here. That's amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about you as an actor, though. I mean, I knew you were a good actor. Like, what did we do? We spent like a year almost, it felt like, doing that damn courtroom drama.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of lines, no lines for me, a lot of lines for you guys. And and obviously knew you were good, but I legitimately thought I was watching De Niro. Like, it was so good. You were just thanks. Like your stature, your posture, everything was just like, oh my God, dude, like you're like doing this. But the thing is, it's not just that you were doing it. You had written and you were directing. And that just blows my mind, because I've acted in things that I've also been directing and shooting in some respects, mostly commercials and stuff. So nothing for however long your shoot schedule was. I mean, how did you balance your ability to play the moment and also have to, watch playback or whatever you were doing to make sure you were hitting all the marks?
I mean, two things. First of all, it's a great question. So I'll get really in the weeds if that's what the show is.
Let's go.
So part of it is I didn't know what I was getting into. But I had played it on stage for all in total, maybe like a year and a half of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew the character I'd written, and, I had that. I was, 75% of the way there before the cameras even started rolling. I knew that it was a very unique artistic opportunity to play a character. Like, for example, if I was playing Sueno, I don't think I could have pulled it off. But think about Frank. Frank is sitting there, always on the verge of losing his fucking mind. He's the puppet master of everything. He loves everybody, but he also wants to kill him at the same time. Mm-hmm. And he has a subtextual agenda that he's slowly hurting all of this stuff towards. He is the director. Yeah.
Basically the director.
So I just was like, I can use all that stuff.
Yeah.
And just as importantly, I was like, I knew Bernthal is one of my closest friends, would look, the best actors, maybe not the best actors, there are actors who are soloists who are great. You know what I mean? And they're in scenes, they monologue, they do their thing, and they're amazing. And quite frankly, they win awards a lot. But my favorite actors are ensemble, and they listen, and they just like real life, like you're not performing. Mm-hmm. So I knew with John and Shay were the best at that. So they were all just there. And those characters love Frank, but they're a little afraid of him, and they're respectful and all that stuff. And that's how those guys were. They're like, you're the director, but let me do this. So we had each other's backs. And the biggest thing was in pre-production, working with, that DP, Matt Mitchell and everything. It was really creating an entire apparatus for, it was like a performance delivery production. Mm-hmm. The camera work and everything was in service of the performances.
Yeah.
And, we did very, very subtle things, which you have to really take a deep dive to notice, as the night goes on and the lens is changing with flashbacks and then getting slightly more anamorphic as we're getting more fucked up and blah, blah, blah. Like really subtle stuff with the camera. But the camera, the whole shop was lit for minimal time to move it around and have flexibility. So it wasn't documentary style, like we had a couple of shots, but it was really about like just moving. And it's not that I love handheld as much, and there are some great moments on sticks, but most of it was like, let's do it again, let's do it. There was no playback. Look, if you pause it and you go look back and you're like, let's try that, none of that. Yeah. So you're in it, and I trust Matt that it's going to look great. We talk about the framing and the thing we want, the coverage, and then you just cover it, and you keep doing it, and you keep discovering it, and you have, you got a scene with the camera on you, and then you got Bernthal, who's like, we don't have trailers, so he's just there off camera. I mean, the best acting in this movie took place off camera with us, everybody working towards each other. So that's only going to happen if you cast the right actors, which we did. And, Ciara was like unbelievable.
So good.
Jordana was a little different because she, her character's so hated, and she just comes on like a whirling dervish and then leaves, which she did great. And then, my wife played Dottie, who's played a variation of that character on stage. I'd seen it, so she knew it. I was like, just bring this. It's freezing cold. You're doing it all. You're out there. And we just surrounded ourselves. I mean, a lot of the guys who were in the New York and LA production were in the play. I mean, in the movie as smaller parts. It was just like a family affair, That's John's dog in there. So like all this shit you have to spend a ton of money and time on.
That's remarkable.
So it was like, I just knew this was a chance of a lifetime to do that. And, I acted a lot more 10 years ago. And then once the writing took off, I just kind of, I love it. I just, it's a fucking full-time job. And I have a full-time job, writing movies and TV. And I just dip my toe every now and then, I'll get some audition for something. And then, it's just, I'm not a great auditioner, I don't think. And I was just like, I know this guy. And it's not, it became not even making a movie. We were doing like an art experiment with each other, just like living it. So that's how that happened. And could that be replicated? I don't know. I mean, some people do that, but like, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity that the material aligned with the circumstances, aligned with everything. and it just fed the performance.
Yeah.
So it just was there. And I also, I have some friends who are great acting coaches, like a good buddy of mine, Brad Fleischer, out of New York, who's like a Broadway actor, and I'm like a huge fan of his work. I sat down with the script with him for weeks and just did my own thing. And this is what I want here, here, and here. And then he was there at the monitor when I was shooting, and I would be like, this is what I want. He'd come over and be like, you know what? You talked about this. I think you should try this. So he had my back.
Cool.
Look, film is a collaboration, and you get rid of the ego. And then, fucking Bernthal would lean over and be like, hey, look, you're holding back. Or Shay would be like, try it again. Let me do this. But we did that with each other constantly because I was like, and also as the type of director, I had some really good advice before I did it, and you guys have maybe figured this out on your own. It's like you will figure out what kind of director you are, and I just try to keep open, but I figured out pretty quick what kind of director that I am. And for me, so much of directing is on the page, but it's really about the collaboration of it and being like, no, I have an idea as to what I want that to be. And I know logically the story point, but then trusting in the actors and everybody else and just letting everyone feel vibrantly alive in the moment to make contributions and, just be there and have their impulses and, hey, try this, let's do this. And if you had paused it every time and went and looked at it and were really anal retentive, I was like, instead of pausing it and going to look at Video Village, which is expensive, I'm like, let's just shoot 2 more takes. Yeah. That's what we did. We just shot like crazy. And then we shot on a camera that allowed us to do that in the different light situations. So basically the whole thing was structured. If I had $15 million to make this, I would have had more time and I would have had more shots on sticks and probably more fancy camera moves, but the movie wouldn't have been acted better. Right. No amount of money I think could have gotten me better actors.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's such a key. You're saying trust. I mean, you mentioned that before when you were talking about your DP, and then obviously speaking about your other collaborators. It's like, I think that's the biggest gift you can give anybody as a leader anyway, is just to trust their work. And then knowing that you have that caliber of actor, including yourself, is like, I mean, come on. The thing I love so much is just in a world where masculinity on screen is so manufactured, it's like it's protein shaked and fucking bench pressed, and I'm just like so not interested in that version of masculinity or that version of a man. And then to see you guys, it's like, I mean, it's the Brando stuff we've been missing. It's that raw wildness that I think we so crave, when we're looking for men, and to see men being men in that way is just, oh God, it's such a blessing, honest to gosh. It really is.
Our stunt choreographers were friends with Bernthal from Punisher. So we had like the Marvel team, like the guy who, one of the guys in the bar scene doubles for Chris Evans as Captain America.
Nice.
No way,
they're like the best, but, and they're very creative, and, they created this sort of fight that was awesome, but it was like more of a Marvel fight. And the whole idea there was like, the person who usually wins in a bar fight is just the one who starts first and doesn't hold back.
The fucking craziest, let's be honest. He's usually the craziest person.
Right. And it wasn't like, Frank dodging stuff. It's just like he grabs him, he just him over and over again with the hand. And that's usually the most sort of brutal person.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do that, and I couldn't do that in real life unless someone was literally hurting my child or my wife. But I would be too concerned with, really hurting somebody, unless you just have that snap, whereas Frank doesn't have that, and that's sort of his dangerous thing. But it's just grabbing, it's hitting, doing as much damage as quickly, because it's terror, it's all that other stuff. And we didn't want to, so to us it was like very much, John and I, who is a producer and very collaborative on this, it was really, to your point, creating real masculinity, warts and all, and creating, the fights aren't fun, they're gross. I mean, people really get hurt, and the violence in the movie should feel very, very elevated and very real, and not like John Wick. Yeah. Which again is fun, is its own way. But that's more like guys, and guys who are damaged like that, and to your point, the toxic masculinity of being raised in that cycle of violence is like, there's always that tension in between it. I mean, I found that being an actor in LA and New York to some extent, is it was very hard to find like guys in terms of auditioning material and stuff. You get really good actors, but they just didn't didn't have that life experience. And again, some people can mask it and make it work, but there's just a sort of heaviness to those type of characters that's just difficult to manufacture. Some actors do.
Well, you're saying like warts and all. I think that's that's what it is. I think it's like we've tried to put filters on people. I mean, society does it to women too. My God, like, good luck finding women that haven't got frozen foreheads. You know, it's like that's just what happens now.
What's fun?
Mine still moves, yay! But like, it's it's really difficult because what is the definition of a woman now? It's like somebody who doesn't eat a whole lot and freezes her forehead and tries to be cute. It's like, what the fuck? It's so bizarre.
No, you're
so in the way we've done that to women, we've done the same thing to men. We've created this very narrow, boxed-in definition of what it is to be a man, and I think it's so sad because it's like there's so much more to when you let men out and you let them out of this little fucking prison. There's so much beauty in that wildness that I feel like, good gosh, let's just see more of it because it's a tonic. It's a real fucking tonic.
100%, man. It's like I always get.
I don't know why I'm cussing so much talking.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sorry, it just happened. I suddenly like slipped
Embrace
into my manliness.
I totally appreciate it. I mean, it's interesting. We do have like you look at like the sort of superhero physique that all these guys have to have, and it's like shaved and like ripped, and like those guys, like they would lose in a real fight because they're so fucking dehydrated. They get tired in like 2
Thank
minutes.
you.
But and conversely with women, it's funny, man. I'm working on this new screenplay right now, and it's an adaptation of this very old book, but I sort of updated this. One of the characters is she's a power lifter. I work out a lot at the gym. I was powerlifting, and there were these women I'd work out with, and they were like beautiful feminine women that had muscles, and not like big muscles. They were just strong as hell. And I was like, oh my God, I want to put her in there. And like I'm pitching to the studio and all this and that. And one of the guys is like, look, we ask the guys all the time to get ripped. We can do that for a woman. And I was like, yeah. I'm like, I see women like that, but they're just not represented, like that facet of femininity that they can do that and be like badass. And in my boxing gym, there's some women who are like, they're really, they're killers. They're incredible. And, to your point, it's like, I believe that people like to see subverted, truthful representations of themselves and not just like, squeaky clean type shit. And it goes both ways. It goes for men and women. And look, I know.
Well, how do you find yourself in that? That's the problem, is when you're looking at that squeaky clean thing, it's like it's very difficult to connect with it because it's like, well, I'm not there. I can't. And then I feel like I've got to make myself look like that thing in order to be able to connect with society. So it's confusing.
Man, I did after Small Engine Repair, I wrote a play called Lost Girls, which is sort of the female companion piece to Small Engine Repair. It's not really a thriller as much, but it's the same neighborhood, same themes. And the main character is a woman, and she has had a very difficult life, and she's just really harsh and swears like a sailor, and she's just done. She's been over it. She had a kid. She's like the third generation of teenage moms in a row, and she's trying to make the best she can. And, it was interesting. This is the sort of time when I was like, fuck it, I'm just not going to read reviews anymore. I took it really personal that, first of all, a lot of theater and a lot of reviewers come from more, I guess, just elitist, more wealthy backgrounds. Because, like, it's not like you're born in a trailer park and you're like, someday I'm going to review. And look, there's some brilliant reviews. I mean, look, I read reviews on other movies because I feel like it can make me a better filmmaker. But in terms of my own thing, I don't know, it's healthier not to. But a lot of these, in terms of Lost Girls, they were like, and Small Engine Repair, but they were like losers with nowhere to go and all this. And I'm like, motherfucker. I was like, this is how most of the country is. Like, most people that I grew up with and still know, it's like paycheck to paycheck. If you go to college, that's a catastrophic financial decision. The electricity's turned off. You're driving an old car. It's like, they're not, Trump voter losers, which obviously Lost Girls came out before Trump. Not even wading into that territory, but it's just not that simplistic. But more importantly, some reviewers had a real problem with how the character Maggie in Lost Girls was so tough on the men in the play. She busted their balls insatiably because she was the alpha. And they were like, had a huge issue, like, at a woman speaking like that. And I was like, my God, when I have a play that men do that, no one has an issue. So it really, we're not as open to that dynamic, especially. They don't, in terms of class and gender. It's like, again, if you do it this way, then you're on our team.
You know that
if you don't, you're
that
not.
aspect of small engine repair is interesting. Tiny character of Dottie, but she has such an impactful role in terms of she's the one making the move, and she's the one kind of driving the ship when it comes to trying to get Frank's number, and that's really interesting. And then she gets kind of bashed later, when Frank's kind of talking about the full bush and all this kind of stuff. But then there's this beautiful flip to it where it's like, but then she was sitting there, with her kid, and I left. It was like this roller coaster ride in about 4.5 minutes of a person's perspective on an entire, dating experience, essentially. And it was brilliant. It was fascinating. And I loved that was, you're giving everybody a voice in that story. Essentially, their perspective was fully heard. And it was exactly how men would talk about the date. And it was also super fun to see a woman be the instigator of the whole thing. It was awesome.
Right. Well, thanks, man. I mean, that was a monologue in the play, but I just loved that as being a character. I mean, look, those 3 flashbacks were were like each character had a monologue, and I couldn't part with them. And I was like, it's again primarily one location. Let me open it up. But I was like, why am I sticking with these so long? And it was because those monologues were really thematic and said what's going on. And in the case of Frank, that's him. He meets this woman and he talks about her bush and stuff to the guys because he's like, hey, I can be a guy, I can talk this way. He doesn't really want to, but it really is so inconsequential to what happened. She's a woman, and she's empowered, and she knows what she wants. And he's like, what am I going to do? And I know a lot of guys like this, and he is attracted to women who are broken because he only feels, like the character says, that he is of value if he's fixing them or fighting someone who's hurting them or defending them. And that's really, if you look at the movie, when what happens to his daughter happens, had he been healthier and gathered everyone around and been nurturing and feminine about it, which is where he ends up at the end of the movie, because it's like that sort of awful shit that happens had to happen to get him there. He doesn't know. He's like, this bad thing happens to you, I'm going to pulverize it because I love you. And that was really it. And that was the tragedy, the tragic romance in a vignette was that. And she liked him and she dug him and she got his goodness, but she's like, my kid comes first and all that. Like, why did he leave? I mean, that was something my wife had said when she first saw she produced the first play. She's like, that's his flaw. Like, of course she's not going to call him back. Like, fuck him. Why did he leave?
Though I was reading it as he only feels like he deserves broken shit. There's that too. It just felt like that's all he felt like it's all he felt like he attracted 100%. In his life, and that's just what he deserves. And that was interesting too.
Well, she's beautiful, and I mean, to get deeper in terms of what I always saw, that was he looks at her and he's like, if I stick around, I'm gonna fuck this up. And this is too beautiful, and I can't because like my hands just hurt. They don't know how to because he's so broken. I mean, and again, that's like when you're just so conditioned to be through violence and things like that, you can't help.
It's generational inheritance.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so interested because you spoke earlier about your creativity being closeted, and this kind of journey of coming to LA and New York and sort of, I guess, opening the door to it and letting it out. I'm so interested in how you did that. Like, what was the steps to kind of unlock it and kind of, let the light in?
The biggest step I made that sort of changed my life is I went on an exchange to NYU. I had a lawn mowing business through high school and college, and I saved money. And I went to UNH. It was an in-state tuition, and I did an exchange that summer. And I went to the city, and I was like around people who, I mean, I love movies. That's all I wanted to do all day was talk about it, but nobody else did, Yeah. I get my friends or family to see something, but they wouldn't talk about it ad nauseum. And I was around people who were my people, and they were from all over the world and all different shapes, colors, genders, sexual orientation, ethnicities, everything. And I was like, this is where I belong. Because I was like, I can be who I am. It was like by being around people who weren't like me, I could be more of who I am.
It's magic.
In a way. Do you know what I mean? And I wasn't just playing the familiar things, and it was great, man. And you're making these movies, watching it day and night. I met some friends there I'm still with, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And it just sort of unlocked that, and I can do this. And I didn't have to hide it, because they were all like, I had all these short stories I wrote that no one had ever read, and I gave them to people in class, and then they would film these stupid little short stories as the exercises and things. I mean, it was like,
it's so God. Cool. Oh my God, it's beautiful. It's amazing when the freaks find one another, right? It's just like, oh my gosh, I'm not weird. You're also weird too.
It was very much. I mean, I remember sitting at the there was this guy, the Southern guy, he was a real sweet, gentle guy, sort of masculine but small, and he had a ponytail. And he was telling me, I was like, I'm dating this girl. I don't know what's going on with it, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, he goes, I was engaged to this woman and we broke up. And he's like, I just want to fall in love. He's like, I don't care if it's a man or a woman. I don't care. And I was like, wow. And I grew up with gay relatives, but no one would ever admit they were gay or talk about it. So I was always like seeing it. I was like, oh my God. And I was asking about it. I was like, oh, so, what is that? Blah, blah, blah. And I ask questions that in today, if I tweeted those questions, I would be canceled, for asking that stuff, because I just didn't know. And I was genuinely curious. I was like, were you always gay? Right. Are you attracted to women and men at the same time? Like, just genuine questions that someone I had spent so much time with. And he was just like, no, it's this. And it was like the discourse of that and learning from that. And I had that experience in terms of, it's funny, man, too, is because like I didn't know I was poor until I moved to New York City and met people and saw the wealth that I have. And I was like, oh my God, that's wealthy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I thought wealth was like my town, like the dentist, you know what I mean? Like, and then you meet these people and you're like, holy shit. But it was cool just to be exposed to that litany of it. And then to be at the end of the day, we're all challenged with this thing, which is to make a story that's like compelling.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I remember that, I just made so many cool friends and so many great experiences, because I was just like, God, I just love to this day. I just love being around people who are different than me and have had a different upbringing and ethnicity and background and city. Like South Africa is like awesome. Like I've never been there. Tell me about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a crazy place, guys.
So that was sort of I bet it is. That was sort of the opening of it,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And it was like, there's so much gatekeeping going on nowadays, and I don't function well like that. But then that was like the gate swung wide open, and all these gates open, and it was just going back and forth, and just meeting all these people and making all this stuff. And they were also like, oh my God, you're from New Hampshire and you mow lawns? That's fucking crazy. Tell me about it. And I was like, what? That's cool? Like all this shit I was like, it's stupid and no one cares about. I was like, oh, that's who I am, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's know what I mean?
Well, Josette was blown away by her first Walmart experience in Fort Morgan, so it makes sense. I mean, legitimately, was like,
really
I didn't expect it to be
but
this
guys,
nice.
I'm a kid from Africa. Like, what do you know? I was like, wow, it's really lovely in here. Everyone's so mean about Walmart, but like, actually, I mean, I really like the Walmart in Fort Morgan.
My God, Walmart is so.
Oh my God.
I wrote a movie that took place in a small town in Tennessee, and I spent a lot of time there. Biggest store there was Walmart, and people went there to get food and groceries and everything. And it's like most jobs in the town were there. I mean, it sucks, but like.
Well, look,
Walmart's super convenient.
I mean, before I came to America, like Walmart to me was like the pictures of like overweight people with their butt cracks hanging out, like that are being shamed for it, like, and that's like that's like basically what we know of Walmart from South Africa, So yeah.
Oh really? Yeah.
I mean, was this so? It's amazing to me that it comes from community and from connection with people that are unlike yourself. But you obviously had these stories in you all along, right? If you're saying you had these short stories that were never sort of shared, were you always writing?
I mean, I think I always, the element of storytelling, the communication element of storytelling, I grew up in a very loud household where you had to really struggle to have your voice heard.
Right.
And I always felt like the telling a story, you're in control of saying something. Now, the stories I wrote when I was younger tended to be like more Stephen King, like horror, or like O. Henry, like the big sort of hook, like, oh my God, I can't believe you just wrote that, and the gore and the disturbing qualities, like Clive Barker and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. And but what's cool about that type of material is you're hooking an audience, you're manipulating them. And then I started to find that more in movies, you know what I mean? And I wrote so many terrible screenplays, and it wasn't until my second sort of big epiphany was I joined an acting conservatory in LA, and the very first, you do plays, you don't do movies, you don't do TV.
Yeah.
So I remember the first like scene I ever did was Death of a Salesman, and I had never fucking read Death of a Salesman or anything, even though I was an English major and all this shit. I never read it, and I read it and I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. Like instead of trying to be derivative of Tarantino, this is these masters, and I really sort of shifted gears for 10 years, and I was just studying the masters, started a theater company, producing plays, writing plays, going to plays, and really found my voice that way. So it was like finding my voice and my sort of point of view and then applying it to movies, as opposed to when I first started, it was just all derivative. I was writing movies about movies. And Small Engine Repair is probably, dead center of that. Like, how can I use my life experience, my point of view, and how I really have something to say with that movie? Whether you get it or not, whether you're offended or not, I am putting something out there that I feel strongly about and I want people to talk about. And I was like, that came from theater.
Yeah. Absolutely.
God, that's remarkable.
Before we let you go here, is it true? Is there a Hulk Hogan biopic coming?
I mean, so Scott Silver, who was the producer of Stronger, who really kind of mentored me through that whole thing. He's from Worcester. And we just hit it off. And he's, even before I met him, he's one of my favorite writers. I like studied his screenplays. So I've written a bunch of movies with him, and he brought me in that. And he and I have been working on that for a long time. And it's a great screenplay. I think, I can't wait. I can't wait for them to make it so I can see it.
It's amazing. I mean,
but it's awesome.
Josette, are you familiar with American wrestling at all?
I mean, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Like we grew up on this stuff. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's so great.
Yeah,
I mean, Hulk Hogan is like a once in a lifetime, character, and it's like, his history, his stories are. This movie is so meticulously researched, and there's so much. There's like 10 movies that we cut out because you have to focus on this story, but so much cool shit. Yeah, that's a real good one.
Not to brag here, but I'm doing a commercial with Ric Flair tomorrow.
Get out. Nice.
Yeah. So when I saw the Hulk Hogan thing, I was like, yeah. But I mean, those guys to us were just...
Well, and you didn't have the internet. You didn't have that stuff. You had magazines. You had the TV. So they were even more mysterious. On
pay-per-view.
Pay-per-view. When you heard about them, you talked about it. I mean, I remember my dad, my dad never even knew what wrestling was. My dad's Italian. He came from... Queens. He just didn't give a shit about any of that stuff. My mom was like, whatever. So I remember going to school and people were talking about it, and I was like trying to go along like I knew what it was, and I'm like, what is this? And then like I got a wrestling magazine out from the bookstore, from the library, and I was reading about it, and I was like, is this real? Why are they all bloody? Like, what the fuck is it?
Right, yeah.
I mean, like, I didn't get it. But the kids whose parents or older brothers showed them were obsessed with it, but we weren't. We didn't have that in my house until later. I remember seeing a couple wrestling matches like in Manchester, New Hampshire. They're pretty crazy. I mean, completely crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, the gritty regional stuff is pretty insane. I think there's a documentary that David Arquette did where he
was a wrestler. He was
a wrestler. Yeah, he was. Yeah, and I mean, dude was doing like the death matches, like regional death matches, where they're like smashing, fluorescent bulbs over each other's backs and stuff. I mean, it's intense. Yeah. It's crazy. So
we didn't even talk about Chicago Conspiracy Trial. I mean, Josette, you never knew that Matt was Matt and I did a play together. Did he tell you that?
He did, but he didn't tell me what it was. He just said you guys had done theater together.
It was a very strange play. They took the transcripts from the Chicago Conspiracy Trial. You know that Aaron Sorkin movie they made a couple years ago? Yeah. So these two writers, Frank Condon and Ron Saucy, right? They took actual transcripts and they sort of sewed them together for like a 2.5 hour drama. And what was weird about it was like I played Tom Hayden, who Tom Hayden came twice to see the play.
He
did?
Yeah.
Okay, that must have been super freaky to have to play a real life person who's sitting in an audience watching you. That's creepy.
It was because and I would, man, it's like, you have a line and then you don't say anything for an hour. So every line you have, it's a bunch of actors making meals out of every little fucking moment. And Matt played the what's it called? The courtroom,
like the marshal,
courtroom marshal is to keep you in line. So the whole point is like we're these scruffy, rebellious hippies yelling out, and we tons of improv, and then Matt and one of the other marshals will get up and they like slam you back in the chair. But we're all like guys and we're like macho and pushing it. And then there's a big bench clearing brawl. And it was not choreographed. Brawl. It was like improv fighting every night. We all got injured, bruises, punching each other for art. And it was 3.5 hours long.
3.5 hours long. Please tell me there was an interval. Long. Good God, that's a watch.
It was an interval.
That's a watch.
But like not very long. It was I think it was 3 acts, right? I think it was 2 acts. I don't even remember, but I just remember being like, you're sitting like, I'm like, maybe it was 3 acts, and there's like an entire act where I'm like, I don't say anything. You just the lights go down and you get up and move chairs. I mean, it was crazy. It was a cool experience.
That's brutal.
Well, the character that I played was a courtroom marshal. So I had no lines for the entire play, but I had to stand there actively engaged in what was going on. So if I ever became any version of an actor, it was because of that play, because I had to actually be
present
in the moment, be present. But we had that particular. So it was a bunch of tableau would begin every scene because there was a lot of blackouts and lights back up, and so you'd kind of start in a tableau and then lights would come up and you're in the middle of a moment. And there was a moment where we had this big fight sequence, and one of the older guys, because it was so not at all safe or choreographed by any stretch, was pretending to punch a guy, and he hit the chair with his fist, which caused his bicep muscle to just rupture and just disengage from its arm. So he goes running off. So he was the only marshal with a line. So you can imagine, as John was saying, there was we didn't have any lines, so we were in a feeding frenzy ourselves trying to get that line. Yeah, so we kind of traded it off.
Now we had in the guy playing the judge, who was a real character. This guy, Matt Murdoch, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh man, what was his first name?
He's passed away since then, but he was in his mid to late 80s at the time. He had done the play originally in this whatever the fucking 70s, and then he did it again.
Good God.
And he's very old, and you do it so much you forget where you are. He at one point got up and the lights came up and he's not there. Like he thought it was like the end of the play. And you're like, huh.
Shit.
So you just start talking and he didn't come out. And it was like, it was so.
I ran back and got him.
Yeah, is that what it was?
He just walked, and I was like, because I forget what his name was. Oh man, but let's just say, whatever. And I'm like, hey, that's not the end of the act. And he goes,
George Murdoch.
It's not. Yeah. There it is. It's like, no, it's not. I was like, no, we got one more scene left.
That is wild, you guys. By the way, first of all, an insane exercise in concentration, and then second of all, an insane exercise in how much money have I got to feed the parking meter in LA to pay for the play I'm acting in.
Well, we got to park in a lot. That was the only incentive.
That was the perk.
And none of us. I wasn't equity at the time, and I'm sure you probably weren't either. So we didn't get paid.
No.
But it was cool, man. I mean, it was that thing like, when never again will I have that much time. Spare time. It was really cool.
See, that's the thing, and it was fun because it was close to my day job, and so I was able to really spend a lot of time just on stage. I mean, we just got to be in the theater for hours every day. Really, it was pretty awesome. Yeah,
not like theater.
It was cool. Yeah.
Well, look at you guys now. I mean, my gosh, like the wild success has hit, and it's amazing to be able to be so reflective and look back at this and be like, good God, what an epic journey for both of you. It's incredible.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
It's been so much fun watching your career develop,
Thank you,
John. And I'm just so excited to see what else comes out. And I cannot stress enough, go see or rent. Well, so can you get Small Injury Repair on Hulu now?
We cut a deal with Hulu. So if you have Hulu, you can watch it for free.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't know
Beautiful.
how long, but for
That's
a while.
fantastic.
So on Hulu or iTunes, where I watched it, I bought it on iTunes.
And then it gets released internationally in, I think, end of March, which should be fun.
Okay.
Awesome.
I mean, look,
That's great.
It's just cool to get these little indies out there, and then I'm really excited to see what South Africa and stuff. They translated it to all these different languages. I get
well, the thing is, I mean,
messages from people.
We have in South Africa,
cool.
We've got the most incredible, a really, really bad problem at the moment with gender-based violence, and it's a pandemic upon a pandemic. We actually had to, for a period of time during the pandemic, ban alcohol consumption because people were trapped at home and they were beating the shit out of their partners. It's
oh my God.
it's horrifying. So I think that's why when I was saying earlier, like, when you were talking about that specificity of your work, it's like this work is so important because I don't think you understand maybe even the ripple effect of what it is to put truth and to put honesty and grit and rawness out into the world, because first of all, you're making people not feel so alone, which I think is just the greatest gift of art. And also you're giving people permission to kind of to look at that mirror, and encouraging it. So I'm so grateful for what you're doing, and I hope you just keep creating in the way you are, because it's a tonic for our time. It really is.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that so much. This was really fun, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks. Thanks for getting the word out.
Yay! And maybe we can have a cup of coffee one day, because Woodland Hills is not that far away.
Yeah, if you get adventurous and you come out, or I'm out there, let's do it for sure.
Let's do it. It's so good to meet you.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for your time, John. This was really a blessing.
Awesome, John. Thanks so much, brother. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, buddy. Bye-bye.